Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 88 of PHP Roundtable. We're going to talk to these people I see at like every conference I go to, and I'm not really sure what their job is. So I'm really excited to sit down and have a roundtable around developer relations. You know, who they are, what they do, what makes them so cool. Um, if you don't know me, I'm Eric Van Johnson, and we're going to just dive right into it. We got a pretty big panel here today. And if you have any questions, if you're watching the live stream, feel free to send a message or mention us on Twitter or Mastodon or X or whatever you use at PHP Roundtable. I'll be keeping an eye on those streams, and we can let the panel know. But for today, let me go ahead and start off with my good friend, Sarah. Sarah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Goldman. You may remember me from such podcasts as this one.
And Everybody But Eric podcast. Don't forget that one.
And the Everybody But Eric podcast. Look forward to it in your favorite streaming applications.
All right.
Find it. We'll look for it.
Kind of new to the game. Our first developer relations person is this is their first time doing it. Is Steve McDougall. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Eric. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, so you're the developer relations at Treble, right?
Yeah, I've just started my developer relations career within the last 7 months for a startup scale-up company called Treble. We do API monitoring stuff, so it's my bag. It's all about APIs.
And also joining us now, I've been called a troublemaker, but so has this person, Jim Cicada with Vonage. How's it going, Jim?
Second.
What?
Cicada.
Like, misrepresent that?
Cicada's
I thought it was right.
Second. Cicada's a sort of a trance artist, aren't they?
I thought you said cicada, like the bugs.
What's it called? Seconda, like the watch, you know. In regards to troublemaker, I would just like to say I've only been called that once, and it was very unexpected. So I'm not really a troublemaker at all. Hi everyone, I'm Jim. I'm a senior developer advocate at Vonage. You may remember us under such previous names as Nexmo, and you might know us from current owners Ericsson. Been doing DevRel for about 4 years now, but I was a sort of a product of London PHP scene, like all of the going to the meetups, and I was like, then I'm never going to go on stage. And then I went on stage, and then I started running my own meetup in Birmingham, etc., and it just kind of like just snowballed. The other fact is that my degree isn't in computer science; it's in theatre studies and English literature, and my dissertation is in stand-up comedy. But don't expect any humor.
All right. And he is the man of mystery, and a person I particularly enjoy watching speak at conferences, Keith Danger Casey. Hey, Keith.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for joining. Now you are with how do you pronounce the name? Pangea?
Pangea, as in the supercontinent. Yes.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
And you used to be in developer relations. You actually got it going, but that's not really your role anymore. But you feel like you have enough input to keep things going here, right?
Yes, I hope so. Right now, I'm a product manager over at Pangea, but let's see. In a past life, I was an evangelist at Twilio way back in the day. So I was employee number 18 over there. I was the first evangelist not on a coast. And for a San Francisco company to hire an evangelist not on the coast was a big deal. But I traveled around the countryside. I did 150 days of travel for a year for a few years. Left there, did another startup that crashed and burned. I was hired at Okta to do single sign-on, identity management, all that sort of things. Again, as an evangelist, realized pretty quickly that wasn't a good fit for like where they were in terms of life cycle. But spent almost 5 years there doing API security stuff. More recently was at Ingrok. So that little tunneling system, Ingrok HTTP 80, I ran DevRel over there for first year I was there, and then helped start building out that team. Left there a few months ago, and now I'm at Pangea. And as a product manager, been working really closely with DevRel. So been in DevRel, or developer evangelism as we used to call it back in the old days, in some form for about 15 years.
Interesting. All right. And another person I think I can consider a friend, Tim Ladle. How's it going, Tim?
There you go. There you go. Yeah, I think we consider each other's friends.
You're over at
So,
Phone Burner now. You're
Phone Burner,
working
yep.
alongside my business partner,
That is
John Congdon,
that is
another
correct.
podcaster.
I get to work with him every day. So
I'm sorry.
no, it's great. It's great. Yeah, as a similar story, I guess, to Keith. Once upon a time, I was in DevRel, and I'm not any longer. But I think there's some on the call that may be shepherding some of the work that I've done in the past. I was the first developer relations hire at Nexmo back when they were Nexmo, and I don't know if we'll get to this. I have some stories that might be of interest. So we'll see. I'm pretty sure I'm outside of whatever NDAs I may have had to sign.
And finally, listen, I'm only going to say this person is probably considered the developer relations representative of the PHP language as a whole. He's been called the godfather of PHP, Uncle Cal.
Hi, everybody. Am I the only one here that looks at Eric and says, why is Randy Quaid hosting a podcast? So.
Oh! Do I look that crazy? Have I gone that far off the rails? Damn it.
No, you're right. I've been doing this. I've been blessed to be able to do DevRel in the PHP community for quite some time. A good chunk of that for Zend, and had an absolute wonderful time at Zend. Matter of fact, when I was doing it the first time at Zend, it was just me and Jay Pipes was over at MySQL. And we didn't even have the term DevRel. They called us the community guys because they didn't know what else to call us. And I found out through trial and error that my basic job was to show up at conferences and buy the first round for any core developer. And, you know, it was fun.
I was actually going to say, if you have not met any of these people on this panel and you go to a conference and you see one of them, these are the people who will buy you a beer. These are the ones you want to introduce yourself to.
We are also the ones that knew how to drain Microsoft's credit cards when they showed up at conferences. So, Keith, I remember, what was it? CodeWorks that we did the traveling tour, and Microsoft showed up at one. We drained one credit card, and somebody else from Microsoft showed up, and we drained their credit card too.
I can neither confirm nor deny such a situation ever happened.
Were you the one who got in trouble for buying too much water? Or was
that was my very first DevRel purchase, and it was I didn't really get into trouble because I was working for DeVisser, and Mark DeVisser, who was my mentor in community relations. I showed up the day after ZenCon, my very first ZenCon. He pulled me in. He says, "I just want to get this straight. You bought $150 worth of water?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did."
So let's start the whole panel, because I honestly I've always seen, like, there were certain people I would always see. I'm kind of disappointed David Stokes wasn't here. David Stokes, to this day, there has not been a conference I've gone to that David has not been there. And I'm just really curious. So I never really understood, what is the role of a developer relations person? You guys have gone by other titles, like Cal said. There used to not even be a title. It used to be developer advocate and evangelist
there for a long time.
Yeah,
but we all got tired of sucker suits, so we got rid of that title.
What does a developer relations person do?
Just want to say, I don't think Jeremy McCullough ever got tired of that. So let's just.
No, he's the master of bad suits. Keith, I've called you the P.T. Barnum of tech. Why don't you start us off with an answer to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at its earliest like earliest form, DevRel, developer evangelism, developer relations, whatever you want to call it, was about getting people to engage with the company to understand what do you do, what do you offer, why should you care about what they're doing and what they're building, things like that. So I think it was very much like an awareness play of here's what we're doing, here are the products we're building, here's how we can help solve your problems. At some point, some of it shifted to like some developer enablement of there's these problems in the community. Let's show you a solution for them. Let's help you get onboarded. Some of it might have been like developer support of, okay, so you're using our product. That's great. Wonderful. How do we help you use it faster? How do we help you debug? How do we help you ship your code faster, solve these things faster? It's kind of shifted more to some of the awareness plays at this point, and I think that's kind of the culture of DevRel at this point. If you rewind back to the early days, like most of this crew, really early, like we were software developers first. We wrote code first. We spent the first, I don't know how many years of our career writing code, and therefore when we stepped into those developer relations circles, we went to code first, whether that is sitting down and helping people debug things, or that was like my shtick was, live coding on stage. I still do a lot of that. I think now it's more of an awareness play. I think now it's more of like, here's this cool thing that we've built. Here's why you should care. Here's why you should use it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. All right.
I've often tried to explain it to people that ask what I did before, at least from when we used to call it developer evangelism. And I myself, it really depends on your company. It depends on what your company's needs are. I like the shift to developer advocacy because from my perspective, that says my role then becomes also taking what my customers, because we're talking about companies that make products for developers, right? It's me taking what my customers are saying and going back to the team and saying, this is the change that you need to make. I need to advocate for our customers. But I would explain it to non-developers is it's like, it's really hard to market to developers. We're an interesting group. And why? Well, because our tooling, a lot of the people that are trying to tell us how to use our tooling, they don't understand it. And developers don't trust people that don't use the tools that you're trying to tell them to use. So, and I have to imagine a little bit because I'm not a mechanic, but I think there's a difference with the Snap-on tool guy bringing his truck and telling you, hey, this is what you need, versus going to the hardware store and finding a guy that's like, yeah, I think that it's shiny, right? And that to me was the difference. Is why do you want a developer out there representing your product to developers? Because they need to speak the same language. You need to look that person in the eye and be like, is this going to work for me? And them to actually understand that, yes, it is. I'm not just telling you that because my product guide says that it will, but I know your problem. I've been in your situation. I can identify with that. And I can say, yep, this will, because there's not a lot of people that understand intuitively what a developer has to do, because it's not necessarily a thing that a lot of, like, do I understand how a chef cooks? No, but I kind of do because I cook, just not at that level. It's hard to get that analogy with writing code unless you've written code.
Yeah, I think a good story of the sort of start of where I realized that this was fast becoming quite an important role was I went to an event in Microsoft's EU headquarters at the time, which was in Reading, a very glamorous place in the UK, and it was called SQL Relay, and it's still going today, but I think it goes by a different name. I can't remember what it was called. There were two people on stage. There was about 350 of us or so. And then two people from marketing, and they were doing a product demo of, at that point, it was quite advanced, but it was SQL Server in the cloud for the first time. And they weren't developers; they're from marketing. So they'd gone through the sort of the deck and the live demo, and like, right, now you do this, and now you do this, and they were trying to sort of rush it, and obviously hands were going up, and they couldn't really answer. And then it started going wrong, and then people were having to like put their hands up and correct them on stage, and you realize, hang on a minute, why didn't you put your engineers on stage? And they're like, well, there aren't any engineers that want to go on stage. Okay, right. So there's this specialist role there. So I think that was kind of the start of I see exactly where this role is going.
Yeah.
What about you, Steve? You're new to this game. How have you felt like you're connecting to this position, and what does a what does your day look like? Like, what do you do? Like in my head, you guys are just sitting around waiting for the next conference to go to. Like, what do you do on like a regular day? Steve, that was for you, Steve.
Yeah, so
Steve.
my day really varies. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you're good. You're good now.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, my day really varies. It depends if there's an event going on or if there isn't. If there's an event going on, typically I'm preparing for that. Like I'm running a hackathon at the minute, which has taken a lot of kind of logistical work to try and get speakers, align everything, get content ready. And beyond that, it's a lot of SDK work for me. So maintaining SDKs, managing issues on SDKs, trying to keep the community growth going in the right direction by being active in our communities. It's really new to me, and it's a bit of an eye-opener as someone who's been a developer for the last 12, 13 years, and suddenly, I came up and as the DevRel, the typical people you see in DevRel on stage giving talks. I was like, okay, I don't know if I could do that job. I don't mind giving a talk, but I don't know if I want to do it for a living. But there's a lot more to it than just giving a talk that I found.
Yeah.
Steve, let me actually ask you a question here. You're relatively new. You said what, 7 months into being DevRel? How are you being measured? What metrics do like matter to your organization?
Yeah, so I've been doing DevRel for 7 months.
By height.
Well, what was it? I'm sorry, I missed the answer. What was the answer?
Yeah, Steve, how are you being measured? Like, what are the metrics that your organization tracks?
So the main thing that we track at the moment is GitHub stars, SDK installs. That's our main metrics at the moment. And yeah, sorry, there is a little bit of a lag. I'm in rural Wales, so.
Well, Jim says he's not having an issue. It's just you. So let's talk to Jim. Actually, let me ask.
He's in Birmingham.
Let me ask. I mean, Steve's new to this, so maybe not so much exposure to it. But of the people who have been in developer relations in the past or currently, how much of your year is dedicated to travel?
Oh, wow.
Oh man, at Twilio back in the day, on a slow year, it was 120 days. My biggest year was 150.
Days.
Yeah, my biggest year was 150 days. So figure that's traveling, 2 days a week every week, the entire year.
Yeah, I heard you say that in your intro, and I'm like, I must have misheard the man because that sounds staggering to me.
So it was funny. I don't know, it's probably 3 or 4 months from leaving, and I used TripIt to coordinate all my travel because that's, I wanted a little bit of sanity left. And I was getting off a flight in Austin where I lived, and TripIt popped up and said, "Hey, you're visiting Austin next week." I'm like, you son of a! Oh yeah, I lost it. But I mean, part of that comes down to like, how are you like, what's your role? If your role is mostly like SDKs and content and stuff like that, your travel is going to be a lot less. If your role is more customer like presentation oriented, like at Twilio back in the day, I was also serving as a role, effectively a sales engineer a lot of times, because we only had a couple. And so there are a lot of opportunities. I'd go to a city for a conference and I'd call our sales reps. I'm like, hey, I'll be here. The conference starts on Wednesday. If I came in on Monday, could you fill my time?
Yeah.
And the answer was always yes. So that's what I did. So I probably opted into more travel than I had to.
I was pleasantly surprised when I found out the travel, because I love travel. And when I started at Zend, I thought I was just writing blog posts, writing code, hanging out in IRC, because that's what we did. But Zend, at that time, when I started, Zend had just come off this disastrous ad campaign, Zend is PHP. and it had pissed the community off so much that nobody would talk to me at conferences. I would show up, and I'd have my Zen T-shirt on, and they would literally shun me. But I was fine with the, oh please, not you, but like Keith, it did get to the point where it was a bit silly. I think I did 25 events in 6 months, and literally I would go home, open my suitcase up, Kathy would just replenish it, and on Thursday I would zip it back up and get back out on the road. It was just a process there for a while. And that part of it it got a little wearing. So, but it was what it was.
That said, I suspect most of that time is actually slowing down, if not gone. I don't think we're going to have quite that same pace. Like as an industry, 0% interest rates are gone. Venture capital is going a lot slower than we did before. There's a lot less conferences now than say 10 years ago. So I think if you want that pace of life, it's not really going to be feasible for most. If you want to hit an event like a conference every month, I think that definitely is.
Yeah, and
there's a nice conference right here in Chicago I can recommend.
Oh, is there?
In April.
When's it happening?
I was there.
Yeah.
Yes, you were.
Yeah.
Is there a call for papers open for that, Eric?
There is.
My travel schedule was not nearly as ridiculous as either of those two, and I think part of it was because there was only one of me at Nexmo. So for most of my time at Nexmo, I was the only person in Devereux. So that meant I was both doing like the documentation, the examples, and whatever conferences we could get to. So I wasn't going to be at one, every other week. I think my travel was pretty much one conference a month ish, or a trip to the office or something like that. So I'd be gone for about a week and a couple days every month, which wasn't terrible, but with the family and a growing family, that became a little bit much too, which is one of the reasons why I decided to swap that. I think eventually I'd love to get back into a little bit more, do it again when the kids are gone and I could actually travel with my wife. Cause I know Cal, you and Kathy, I see together at conferences, and it's like, when you can do that seems really cool. But when I'm basically booking my travel to say, I need to leave the conference so I can get on a flight so I can get home because I don't want to be here another day. I might love seeing the sights, but I want to see the sights with the people that I love, and they're back, 2,000 miles away. I want to get back to them. So the travel can be a downside.
I'm sorry. The downside of traveling with your wife is eventually when you show up at conferences and she's not with you, the community goes, "Where's Kathy?" And I was like, "Oh, she couldn't come with you."
You guys are afraid.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It got to the point where they like her more than me.
She finally left you. I knew it was coming.
Okay, I think I have probably what's going to be considered a fairly ignorant American question. I realize everybody does a little global traveling as developer relations, but I'm really curious, Jim, being in the UK area, how frequently are you going to like other countries? Is that like norm? Because for us to we only have a couple of other countries we could easily go to here in the US, and that depends on where you're at. But if you're not actually in the UK and you're just over there in the EU somewhere, popping around from country to country is fairly easy. How much of do you just stay in the EU, or do you bounce around the whole area over there? I mean, the UK, or bounce around the EU?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, to mention the travel, what Keith said is true, is that with venture capital slowing down and the framework conferences are getting bigger and the generalist conferences are getting, there's less of them and there's less people going to them. So the managers, our managers, for instance, are very, very wary of burnouts. They're super on it that you can't do. I remember, a final interview at Datadog years ago. My final interview was with Jason Yee, and Jason Yee spent 2 weeks at home in Seattle and told me about it. And he said, "How do you think that sounds?" And I was like, "I don't like the sound of that." But it's so for me, the time wise, I go to the travel is as sort of a senior advocate on my team. I have to I have to decide the strategy. I have to look at the community. I have to look where the biggest business impact will be. The US market, for instance, post kind of Nexmo with the work that sort of effectively for anyone that, well, most people in this panel know, is that the team that Tim started out building is now the one I'm in, but now there's like 45 of us, and it's been through various iterations. So I have to go where I am needed to make the biggest impact. So at the moment, this year I went to Germany 3 times. I went to and also different sizes. So yes, I went to We Are Devs, which is there's about 13,000 people at that. That's one of the flagship EU events. But also I went to speak at PHP Frankfurt and PHP Dresden just to speak at that meetup in the evening. I go to PHP London. I've got an invite to speak at PHP Amsterdam. But next year the things on the cards. There's apparently a really good, well-known conference happening in Chicago that I believe has been mentioned that I might be considering coming to. But yeah, the things like the things like the Laracons and PHP Tech and Longhorn, which is coming up. I'd still do the same as anyone else, really. But there's more opportunity within the EU because there's so much more of a concentration in a small area of user groups for me to make impact.
To kind of continue on that and actually rephrase Eric a little, I imagine, I mean, I've always considered the oceans to be the big barrier. It's a lot easier to bounce around the US to a conference than to go all the way across. Like, okay, I'm going to cross the ocean. I'm going to spend a couple of weeks at it because I don't want to have to cross the ocean more than I have to. So I'm going to try and stick things together. But if I'm just going to like LA or something like that, that's something I feel like I can do in a couple of days, turn around and not lose my mind over it. So as opportunity has maybe shrunken a little and focus has narrowed a little, do you find yourself just not crossing the oceans as much, even if you are maintaining yourself in the UK EU territory? I think is what you already answered. So.
I don't mind the kind of I don't mind the crossing the pond, and if I have to do it, I have to do it. I mean, the jet lag's a bit of a killer, but we've got some other things that are open. We've got emerging markets that are emerging that are coming up, and for me personally, Laracon India is like quite a big it's quite a big opportunity that we're looking into at the moment. I can't reveal any more than that, but there's things like that. But I think the fact that there's less of them means that it gives more opportunity. That the travel's still there, but I have a lot of open source SDK engineering to do in my day to day. So you just spread it out and fill the rest of it with product work.
That's interesting how you phrase that, because as a developer, and somebody who's been doing PHP for a while, I don't think of quote unquote emerging markets. How is there something you guys do to identify that, or it's just like, oh yeah, it looks like there's a lot of interest over here on this particular framework, perhaps we should go over there and talk to them? I mean, is there like some kind of formal way you all watch for this? Anybody?
I was just waiting to see if anyone else.
Yeah, so back in the day at Twilio, we looked at emerging markets in a couple different ways. We looked at the city level. So, when we were looking at our blog traffic and things like that, we could see there was a heavy concentration from San Francisco and New York. Okay, we know that, discard those. Then we'd look at, like within the US, what are the next tier of cities? And like Seattle, Chicago, Austin, we're always high up there. Dallas is already always high up there. So like, where is there already enough interest that then we can grow? Because if you can grow a group, a community or whatever by 10%, if it's 100 people, that's way more valuable than if it's 10 people. So it's more of like, where can I have some sort of ROI of what I'm doing? So that was like a geographic layer. And so really, especially as a team grew, we tried to limit people to like, where can you get in a direct flight? That sort of thing. Then we also looked at like languages and frameworks. So I was heavy in driving us into the Drupal community, because there was somebody who happened from I remember his name, he's from the MIT Media Lab, who built a Drupal module that integrated Twilio. And I was like, oh, how do we double down on this? Like, how do we get his, like, how do we promote what he's doing? How do we amplify that to then make inroads into that community? So it was less about us pushing and more about finding people already doing good work and amplifying them.
Yeah.
Building champions scales a hell of a lot more than all of us individually covering events.
Yeah, because then you get the community to use the term that gets applied to this, to evangelize itself, because they're talking about your product and you're talking about them who are talking about your product. But to kind of piggyback on that question, it depends on what your, developer relations is a big thing, right? And I think most of the people on this call, if I'm not mistaken, we're all developer relations, right? Cal with, hey, it's a language, PHP, right?
Yeah,
if we had Dave Stokes on here, it's a database, right?
Yeah.
We got Twilio, we got Nexmo, and Steve, if I understand what your product is doing, it's catering, it's a product for developers. But you also have developer relations when it comes to say, hey, we're Salesforce. All right, developers aren't exactly your main focus, but they're part of it and they're needed, right? And you need that community. You need that community, just like, if we want to talk about pioneers in the developer evangelism field, for sure, Twilio's going to come to mind in terms of API. But before that, it's Microsoft. As Jim, as you put in the chat, developers, right? Microsoft sells a technical product to users, but they understood how important it was that developers wanted to build software on their platform. That was key, and they wanted to make it easy, and they wanted to embrace that community. And for all Microsoft is, they did a great job in defining what a company that isn't necessarily making developer products only, like a lot of the companies that we represented, right? That's what you're selling. You're selling a developer product, but understood how those two things had to come together. So developer relations is a big ecosystem, and there's companies out there that it's not their primary product, but they still want somebody in this role. But when we talk about emerging markets, there's also the concept of when we're building something new, Twilio didn't start with SMS. They started with voice. Nexmo didn't start with voice. They started with SMS. And those were both products that we added on later. And then when you talk about an emerging market, you're like, all right, we just created a new product for developers. Where are they? And how do they tell them that you should at least try us? So sometimes you create your own emerging market by creating the product that you didn't have yet. And Steve, I'm guessing with some of the stuff that you're doing, you're going to find that. You're going to find, we've got a whole new feature that appeals to a whole new group of people. We kind of know where they are. How do we get them to see us? So that's
it's the hardest part of the job is.
Tim, you just bumped into something like super important and interesting, though, of like when you're building a product and growing the product, of developer relations could potentially be the intelligence wing of your organization. Of you can be out in the field or in your communities and say, developers in these ecosystems, they look like this. These are the problems they have. These are the tools they're using. Here's a problem we could solve for them that maybe is not a radical departure from what we're doing, but it's kind of the adjacent thing. And using taking one strength you have and then stepping into the adjacent thing. You just described it with Twilio and Nexmo. Like Ingrok's doing it. Like all these people do it the exact same way. This is not this is not rocket science, but DevRel can be your intelligence wing.
I'm gonna ask. Is it okay if I ask a question, Eric? Does that work for the group?
Sure.
Where should developer relations, whatever you call it, where should it fit in the organization? Who should it report to? Where does it fit?
Marketing.
So this is a great question, because this is a story, and I think I can get away with telling it. When Nexmo started, DevRel was in marketing, and I did not like that at all. I wanted to either be in product or in engineering. And once upon a time, Jim, this is the SDKs you're working on. We looked and we said, we need SDKs. And basically the play was, well, Tim, the developer guy, is saying we need SDKs. So we need him to tell engineering what they need to build. So I went and I pitched it to that time, the CTO and head of product. And we were talking through it. I'm like, this is what we need to build. And the question was asked me, can you build it? I was like, yes. And marketing hated that. They were like, no, you can't build that. And in the end, they were like, well, he'll build it and they won't like what he builds because he's Tim. He's not an engineer. I'm like, I am. Thank you. And they'll see it and then they'll realize they want to do it themselves. I built it. They loved it. And that's where I was able to say to head of product and CTO, developer relations should be part of engineering because we can contribute there. And that is what got at Nexmo, DevRel moved out of marketing to engineering. And if I'm not mistaken, Jim, at one point, may not be this way today, didn't product on the API side report to dev relations?
It got very, the structure got very, very confusing. I mean, I can't go into sort of it now because it's actually live. I mean, apart from the fact that I can probably reprimand you for the fact that every day I have to look at your code. But I can also tell off Tankersley because I have to look at his code every day. And I took his job and then he came back. So...
Right, yeah. But I think when we put DevRel in marketing, we don't understand what they're trying to do.
I think that DevRel has to talk to engineering and has to talk to marketing and even has to talk to sales. But the best DevRel positions I've ever had, the two best I've ever had, I answered to marketing. And the one was the very first. I answered to DeVisser, who was CMO. And I wasn't head of DevRel. I was DevRel,
right.
you know. And because yes, I had to bring information back, and I had to talk to engineering. At that time, I had to talk to Paul Jones and MWAP about Zen Framework because that was one of our products, you know. And I had to talk to them about it, but I could talk to them about it because engineering knew that I was a software developer. Marketing respected the fact that I was a content creator. If I had been in engineering, marketing would have just written me off. And if, you know, even though, you know, I make the joke in marketing every day when I went to stand up, I had to put on my beanie and spin my propeller. It was still, it felt like the right place to be, at least with those two positions.
Yeah. And
I think a lot of it
depends on the company. It really depends on the company. But yeah, I think a lot of times when we just think of it as a marketing function, we miss what a developer advocate or whatever you want to call the position can bring to the
I
rest
think
of
it
the
depends
company.
on the company. I think it depends on the leader. I think it really depends on the individual leader. So like at
the company and the goals, I think, are the two things. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just
no, potentially. But like at Twilio and now at Ingrok, DevRel reports into marketing. At Okta, DevRel reported into product. At Ingrok, for some reason, DevRel reported into sales. That was the worst of all of them. But I think if you have a leader who
that sounds painful.
Oh yeah. We'll have drinks later and we'll talk about it. But I think both at Twilio and now at Pangea, the CMO understands developers inherently. Both women, they get it. They get it backwards and forwards. They understand here's what developers are struggling with. Here's why they're struggling. And as a result of understanding that problem and what our goals are, now we can extract metrics that go along with it. But Sarah, so I think you're right. Metrics are a piece, but I think metrics are the output. I think that leader and their mindset is the input.
I wanted to kind of, Tim got me thinking of a question, and feel free to anybody jump in and answer. As a developer, in my head, whenever I talk to somebody who's in developer relations, I hope like this is like a two-way street, right? Like I'm listening to you, but at the same time you're listening to us and saying, oh, hey, it would be really nice if your product had this endpoint, or if your product had this SDK, or it was able to do that. Is that a reality, or am I just? Is it a two-way street?
It should be.
Really just
Depends on the company.
There's an awesome quote from one of the sort of developer relations leaders, Mary Thengval, which is when people want a concise kind of definition of it, they say, I represent the community that I am part of to my company, and I represent my company to the community that I am part of. And that forms part of that two-way street. So a massive part of what we do at Vonage is a lot of product feedback. We listen to what people want. We listen to what communities want of why don't you have a Golang SDK? Are you thinking about Rust, etc., etc. So yeah, there's a lot of, it's an essential part of what we do. But as with everything engineering, it depends because everyone's DevRel team looks different.
It depends on the company, because I had a really not my favorite position, but it was I would take ideas back from conferences and I would say to engineering and to marketing and to leadership, they're asking for this, and leadership would simply say, no, we're not going to build that. And that gets demoralizing in a hurry, because, you know, after about 3 or 4 conferences, you keep hearing the same thing over and over again. You know that feedback is not going to be worthy. We've been saying a version of that, Jim, forever, that we represent the company to the community and the community to the company. But if the company doesn't want to hear it, it's just lip service. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Road's trust. Yeah. No, I mean, we're all kind of hovering around the same point of like, this needs to be a two-way channel. Like as an engineer, I've done something DevRel-ish in the past, HHVM, but I haven't done it in a while. But in my day-to-day job today, I'm always asking through product, which is my avenue to developer relations, like, okay, why are we building this? Who's asking for it? And what's their story? Because like, that to me is an essential piece of the development process. You can't build something if you don't know who you're building it for. And so, yeah, I mean, I think when you're in those positions where you have companies who are just like, well, we have developer relations because we want to tell people how to develop with us. We want to tell people that they should develop with us, or we want to tell people that. If you don't have that inward bound channel, like, those developers aren't dummies. They're going to figure that out. And that trust that you as the DevRel person have started to build up is going to erode.
Yeah. And like you're saying, Kel, that's super frustrating when you as the DevRel person are going back and you just know, like, you want it to be a two-way street, but if the roadblocks, you know, if the roadblock is upstream, it's really frustrating. I think that's,
and you can tell if you go to a conference and there are DevRel people speaking at that conference, you can tell the companies that listen. When I was running conferences, I had this one, and there's this very large database manufacturer that I will not name, and I had given them a slot in one of my conferences, and literally 10 minutes after the session started, people are streaming out of that room. It was obvious they're preaching to the developers. They're not interested in conversing with the developers. And literally by the time he finished, there were 3 people in there, and I swear 2 of them were doing email. So, you know, you can tell the companies that are really interested in hearing from their community and the ones that are just there to talk to them.
I think that's too one of the reasons why it's important to have developers as developer advocates, evangelists, whatever you want to call it, because you can't very well take that feedback back responsibly unless you understand the problem, and you need to understand the problem because you're also a developer. If I'm just there saying, this is what the product guide says, let me tell you about how to use it, I've learned to say the speech, and then a developer says, well, why don't you do it this way? You can try to bring that feedback back, but it's going to be very difficult to do it effectively. So I think that's why you find developers in these roles.
I found one of the most powerful questions I could ask, like as a developer evangelist in the field, the single most powerful question you can ask is, what are you working on now? It's amazing watching people stop and go, oh, I'm just writing code. You go, no. What are you working on? What are you building? 95% of developers will be like, oh, you actually care.
Right, and you can understand what I tell you.
Yes, and they will tell you, and they'll walk you through in great detail. And to be able to have that back and forth of like, oh, okay, so you're solving this problem. Okay, well, what are you doing here? How are you doing this? They just have such a blast. Even if it's not related to your product, the connection, the learning that comes from that experience is mind-blowing. And then when you say, hey, by the way, I see you have this problem, or this problem, or this need, or this capability is coming up for you. How are you solving that? They go, oh, I haven't thought about that yet. And then you can go, by the way, that's the problem we solve. And even if they never have a conversation with you about it, you've at least dropped that into there.
I got to tell a story.
Built some trust leading into that too.
All you have to do
I
is
got
show
to
that
tell
you
a
give a
story
damn.
because Keith has been talking too much. No, Keith reminded me of this. There used to be a conference, Lone Star PHP. Loved that conference. But we were up there. I was speaking at that, and Keith was representing Twilio. And so I'm watching, and Lone Star had, what, 300, 350 people? I mean, it was never huge, but it was respectable. And I'm watching, and Keith has 50 to 100 people standing around his table at any given time. And I'm fascinated by this. Keith and I were good friends at that point. And so I'm watching it, and I'm standing next to the guy that's running the booth next to him, and there's nobody in that booth. And I said, how's it been? He says, the only people I've talked to today are the ones I've been able to pick off from his audience. That's because he was asking questions like that. Okay. Now, again, I tease Keith that he's the P.T. Barnum of DevRel because I've seen him draw a crowd out of nothing. But it's because he is a developer, he understands development, and he can speak the language. And the worst DevRel people I have ever seen are the ones that are not developers. They're primarily sales or marketing, and they show up and they try to talk to developers. And if that's your idea of DevRel, then you're literally just throwing money out the window.
Yep.
Sorry, that's my favorite Keith story.
I'll say if you don't
That's
have
the only
the
one he's allowed
dynamism
to
of
share in a public forum.
If you don't have the dynamism of Keith, you can just get yourself some elephants, and
yeah.
that'll work in a pinch.
We'll get. I imagine we can get onto swag soon. But yeah, we had a similar thing where we sent three. There was a local conference, and three of us went to it, and we were sponsoring it, and our table was just completely swamped. There was and it was full of all sorts. There was a lot of boot campers, like, what shall I start out with, what language and what framework? And then there were people that were product owners, and we were talking to them because to us, non-technical people are just as important. And next to us, there was a reseller of some sort of Kubernetes service, and they didn't read the tech rider that said, if you sponsor this, do not send your sales and marketing people. Nobody will be interested. I didn't know until the first session happened, and I went over to speak to the bloke, and he was like a Cockney geezer, and he was like, "Oh yeah, and what I did is they offered me a Docker, and I said you could do one, mate, blah blah." And then he just started talking about himself, and I thought, "Oh, no wonder no one's at your booth." And then the rest of the 2 days, no one went near his booth. Why did you do that?
Yeah, because you'll find people come and they want to ask you a question because you're a developer. And it's like, well, how did you solve this problem? Yeah. It's like, sure, let's talk about that.
Sometimes it doesn't involve knowledge at all, but it doesn't really matter. You can crowbar it in somehow, possibly, but if you can't, then you just have a conversation with them.
Yeah, because one day they're going to need a tool that's similar to what you build, and then they'll know you answered their question, and you gave them a reasonable answer. So you'll probably give them a reasonable answer about your own stuff. So.
Shout out to Andrew Woods. When you're a developer advocate, your job is to be Tron. You fight for the user. That's actually pretty accurate.
We have some other questions coming in through Discord, including one from A Woods. I think we kind of addressed this already, but he asked, how much does content creation, videos, blog posts come into your DevRel day to day?
A lot for me.
Yeah. A lot for you, Steve?
For me, yeah. I mean, a lot of what I do at the moment, because I mean, compared to some of you others here, you know, you're in bigger companies that have been around for longer. I'm in a 2-year-old scale-up company that, you know, our SEO footprint is tiny in comparison. So trying to get our product in front of those people, we've got to get that content going, got to get that relevant content going as much as possible right now. So a lot of my work right now is content focused. Whereas if it was a larger organization like Jim, his focus is less on kind of growing the garden, that is his community, and more about maintaining it, because the community's already there because it's a bigger brand name that's already known. Whereas mine, you know, I'm still pulling out the weeds and trying to figure out how to grow that garden.
You'll never stop pulling out the weeds. That never ends. But I think static content, whether it's video or blog posts or GitHub repos or whatever, I think needs to be a higher priority in most DevRel programs. Conferences are great. Conferences are a blast. Conferences are where you develop those back channels to other organizations and you meet and learn from great people, and you can see people face to face. But it's super ephemeral. A week after that conference, almost no one is going to watch that video again. The number of people watch is exceptionally small. But when you publish a good blog post, that will go around for years.
Absolutely.
And
conferences are also where I developed my drinking problem. I'm just saying.
Yes. But the gold standard on this one is actually DigitalOcean. If you dig into DigitalOcean's analysis of their blog, they say for every article they've published, every help guide, whatever, each one represents one new user per month forever. That's amazing. So when you think of just adding each blog post, adding like one user per month, that's 12 a year, that's 24 every, that grows, and that's fantastic.
That's amazing.
And especially if you're starting out, right? Or if you're rolling out a new product, that static content is tremendously important. I think it was you guys at Twilio that coined the phrase, Keith. The time to first hello world.
Yep.
Like if I'm a developer, how long does it take me to go from seeing what your API is, what your service is, whatever it is, to executing code that makes me go, oh, it worked. And you want that to be as short as possible. How do you get that as short as possible? Well, some SDKs help, right? Right, Jim? Like SDKs, so you can download it and just have a library that does most of the lifting for you. But you need the content to show this. Well, what's your use case? You want to send a message? Cool. You want to proxy an API? Cool. Here's how you do it. And if you have the content that says this is how you can do it fast, you get a developer engaged with your. I mean, the worst thing in all of developer relations. And I was in another conversation talking about this today, is putting any documentation behind a sign up ever. Cut it out. I mean, I know why they do that, because somebody says, oh, you know what? If people sign up, they're 20% of them that sign up become paid users. It's like, okay, so let's put everything behind a pay or a sign up wallet. That makes absolutely no sense. Get the doc. Let me know as a developer how to use your product. If I can see how I can use it, I will use it. If it's hard for me to figure out how to use it, I'm going to stay away, because everything's going to be hard then. So that's why that content's super important.
I wrote a blog post about this like a year and a half ago. It's talking about I coined the dangerous delay, and it talks about when you're running an API, you've got a product company, and you're trying to get things out there. The way the adoption works is there's that first touch. There's that first time some developer finds your platform and they say, will this solve my problem? And so if you're looking at like on a time axis, there's zero usage, there's a little bitty bump, and then it goes back to zero, because yes, it validated my problem, or no, it didn't. Either way, it works out exactly the same. Then there's this long delay, because they filed it in the back of their head of like, oh yeah, this thing solves this problem I might have. At some point, hopefully some requirement comes up in their day job and they go, oh, that problem that I had, oh, now I know the tool. Let me go back to that. So then there's a second bump at some period down the road where there's a little bit more usage than last time, and then it goes to zero again, because they built out that feature, they finished it, then they put it in production, and the usage dropped off to zero because they're testing and everything. And then if it was successful, then it looks like a hockey stick going up. Yeah. And the problem you run into is that gap between that first bump and that second bump is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, because you don't know if that user went away because it did solve the problem, but they just don't have that problem. It's not a pressing problem yet. Or if it didn't solve their problem and they're just completely unsatisfied with your tool. And I've done a ton of analysis on this. It's written up in the blog post, but the more you could do to shorten the window, to move that kind of important task to a critical task, the better off you'll be.
And some of that you can do through the content creation and actually saying, here's the use case, here's the use case, here's the use case. Yeah. Let me explain to you how valuable what we are, how valuable it could be to a whole bunch of different, use cases. So then one's close to mine, I go, oh, you're right, I could use that way.
Well, that's one side, and you nailed it. You could say, here's the value of this. It is way more valuable than you thought it is. That's one side. Or you can flip it around and say, hey, look, this is easier than you thought it was. It's not a 5-point task. This is a 1-point task.
Right.
You're kind of dumb if you don't just knock it out right now.
Yeah. And there's where libraries and SDKs can come into play too, because it's like, if you can say it's pretty much just download this, use this library for your language. It's ready to go. Couple lines of code, and you're integrated with these common use cases. It takes you zero effort because we handled it all. You know, the common use cases, we've got it all ready for you to go. You just customize a few things, and you're off and running. And there's the value for that, which is in content creation, but it's I don't know what you want to call it. It's
code and storytelling. It's code and storytelling. That's what it boils down to.
Yep.
A lot of storytelling. See, when I started doing DevRel, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter, X, whatever it is this week. We didn't have any of those. So blog posts were really it. And so literally I would get up in the morning and do two things. I would find somebody that's written something interesting to the PHP community and post that on, what was that site called? Dev something or other. I can't even remember anymore.
The Dev Zone? Was it
DevZone? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd post something, and then I'd spend the rest of the day writing my own blog post. Working on an SDK to do something with PHP, things like that. Because a lot of the code examples out at that time, this was in the early 5 days, and a lot of our code samples were still 3, and so I had to just start writing that. But now we have tools that make it a lot easier to expose this information, but if you're still not writing that content, you've got nothing to expose. And Keith, I agree with you. DigitalOcean is the gold standard as far as a content strategy.
They're who I look at for inspiration when I'm trying to plan what I'm going to do from a content perspective. Because what I find is a lot of people, and what I see a lot on DigitalOcean is, you've got a problem, you Google the problem, you DuckDuckGo the problem, whatever it is you might do, and they've built their blog around you asking that specific question. Yes. So that it comes up and you read it and it's okay, great, that actually solved my problem because it explains what you're trying to solve. But sometimes coming up with those use cases is hard. That's my biggest problem, is coming up with those use cases.
So we got another question coming in from Discord, and I want to actually expand on this a little bit. The question is, what skills are needed to become a DevRel, and what is the employer looking for when hiring? And I would even expand on that by asking, would you even recommend somebody to have that as a goal? Like, do you just become that because you're a developer and you would just get recognized as somebody who would be good for that? Or do you think that's actually like a goal somebody should like strive for to become?
I get asked this question all of the time by everyone because it's now a very visible and defined role. And people mostly don't like my response, which is a lot of people see the conferences and they see content on things like Twitch and live streaming and think that's what it is. How do I set my career path onto it? And the thing is that you'll see there's quite a kind of colorful range of backgrounds for everyone that's in it. Mine's a bit of a joke one, as I was explaining before we started that, as we started that, yes, I have my degrees in theatre and English literature, therefore I was expecting to go on stage, and I do a lot of writing. And then my tech career started as soon as I graduated from university. And to get my tech career, I needed a community, so I lent completely on the community. So what's happened is I've snowballed all of my career into DevRel, and I just don't think you can force that. And also, a lot of people, it's mostly within the sort of JavaScripty world, a lot of front-endy stuff like React and Vue and things like that is this kind of growth hacking kind of influencer personality type thing of like, if I keep on doing this, can I get a job in DevRel? Well, employers most of the time in developer relations don't know what they want, especially if they're not established, like they have quite a big team or they have someone that has come in at executive level that knows exactly what they want. So it's a very, very niche, unusual skill set. And I think you do need quite good engineering chops to be able to do it. And some people think that's controversial. But if you don't have the empathy and you haven't deleted production when you're a junior, which I have, then how how are you supposed to get to that area where you need to speak to developers at all levels on stage? I have some stuff that's career driven and some stuff that's for juniors. I have some stuff that I mostly don't understand, and then I ask Tank and he explains it to me. But asynchronous PHP, like through React PHP and things like that. But you need to also appeal to engineering managers and see. So it's really hard to steer that skill set. And I think if you wanted to do it outright, like I want to do this in my career, you've got to sort of move all of the sort of chess pieces to the right bit in order to be able to do it.
I think a reasonable question.
I actually asked you this exact question, Jim.
You really? I think a reasonable question to respond to that question is like, what skills are needed? I think it's more important to ask, why do you want to do this? Like, why do you want to be
100%.
like, if you're looking at developers, why do you want to be there? Because my gut says, and just based on my experience, right, you're going to be good at it and you're going to like doing it if you like helping developers solve problems. If you like, hey, no, I want to be known in this community. I mean, that's a fine goal too. DevRel may be a way to get there, but you're not going to be good at it if you don't say, I like helping developers. I like helping other developers figure out problems and solve them. And I like delving into their problems. I like thinking about it. I like writing about it. I like telling people how I solved the problem. And if that is what you like doing, then you can find a good fit in DevRel because it'll have all of that. But I would hesitate to view it as, well, if I can do that, then I can accomplish something else, unless you already like that work. Now, if you like that work, then you kind of have the skills. Just refine them, right? Because I'll admit,
That's exactly why I got into it.
I got into DevRel.
And I was
gonna pitch PHP Tech and say, if you watch the keynote from PHP Tech, which you can do, I talk about why I got into DevRel. I got into DevRel because I was a contract developer who couldn't stomach the cost to go to there's even an ad here. I was a contract developer. I couldn't afford the ticket and the hotel and getting out to conference. So I said, if I can convince a company to send me there to talk to other developers, then I can at least be a part of this community. And I can at least start seeing these people. But along with it, I also loved helping other developers figure out how to solve their problems. So yeah, I did it because there was something else I wanted out of it. But the motivation still was there. It's like, yeah, I want to show you how to do this. I love doing that.
So there's two legs in there. There's the wanting to help other people, which is, yeah, I agree, a very important piece of it. You actually have to enjoy that interaction and that reaching, that extroverted part of that, which is why I think I never did very good at DevRel, because I'm just not extroverted. But the other half of that is just being very good at something. You don't have to be the foremost expert in the world, but you do have to understand your content. You do have to understand it deep enough to know how to explain it to somebody else. If you're just like, oh yeah, code makes computers go burr, that's not quite a deep enough understanding to explain to them how to solve the problems that they have. So like,
and I think that's what took me so long to get into it.
To finish my thought, the first step on a road to DevRel is get good at something. And I don't mean like, oh, step up, scrub, get good, but I mean just like hone your craft, build that skill, get your 1,000 hours in, your 10,000 hours, whatever they say you need to do to become very good at something, and work on that. The mentoring aspect of that, of working on your junior engineers to get them better, because that is a lot of the same muscle as helping out.
That's exactly what I tell people to do. I say, don't shoot for DevRel, shoot to become a better senior engineer. That means learn how to write better code. That means debug. That means write documentation. I've never heard of a team that says, wow, our documentation is perfect, it doesn't need improvement. Make a point of reading about things that are going on in your community, in your ecosystem, in your tool set. Bring that back to the team. Show them, hey, here's what's going on in our ecosystem. Here's some tools we might check out. Here's why. Mentoring, like you said, like all those things. If you do those things well within your team, you will naturally pick up the skills to be a good DevRel person, and potentially then you've got credibility with that org of like, wow, this developer knows their stuff backwards and forwards, and they can get up on stage and tell a story, or they can stand in front of our team and tell a story. Okay, cool. Like we can work with that. That's how you become
and then
a
becoming
DevRel
that
person.
DevRel person is automatic almost. It
Right.
just
Yes.
it falls out of the skill set.
And by the way, you left a better team than how you found it. And I think that pays dividends for decades.
Cool.
Or you
Yeah,
can be
'cause-
Cal and just love the sound of your own voice.
I'm not ashamed of it. I also fell into DevRel. I happened to be running a team out in California, and Zend had a not, it wasn't Dev Zone yet, but they had a repository of you could upload your code to. And I had uploaded some code, and nobody would release it. And so I got to talking about it, and they said, "Well, we don't have anybody managing that." And so I started managing that in all of my spare time. And then this position came up, and DeVisser just happened to be in Nashville for a conference. And he said, "Hey, let's have lunch." And I walked away from lunch with a job offer. So I literally fell into it. But get your developer chops first, because that way you've got a plan B in case your startup folds. So,
and not to take away from anybody else here on the panel, but honestly, for years, to me personally, like Cal was the voice of PHP. If somebody was talking about PHP and it was Cal, I was listening. And for I didn't care about being a good enough developer to present at a conference, or a good enough developer to for people to like think I'm a good developer. I wanted to be a good enough developer to be invited to the Booze is Talking. It's the Booze Talking. I felt like once I did that, I had made it in the PHP world.
those were some good, fun podcasts.
Yep.
Okay, Keith, they were fun. If nothing else, they were fun.
But yes, to your point, the literal voice of the elephant, I would say, is Cal.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
With what Keith said though, like some of us aren't in DevRel anymore, right? Like not officially, but I still see a ton of similarities between what I do at the team that I work with now and what I did with DevRel. Is there's a developer that's having a problem, I'm going to help them. Like that's what you do, right? Like so you can, if you're saying I think this is a place that I want to get to. Somebody, what Keith is exactly right. Do what a DevRel person would do with the developers that you happen to be working with right now. Be the first person to help them to debug something or find something. Show them what you fixed. Show them how you solved it. Show them the mistakes you made. Talk about that, right? That's maybe the most important thing for someone who is leading a dev team or wanting to mentor develop. Talk about your own mistakes and then what you learn from them. Because that's what other developers need to know. They need to know that it's okay to make those mistakes. We all do.
Yeah.
And what's important is that we use that to then accomplish something else. So just practice those skills. And I guess if they're just to wrap that question up, if there is a skill to refine, it's probably be able to get up, have a laptop, write code that's live on a screen, and not freak out when it breaks.
Yeah.
Refine that, because that's the one thing that you can't say you do in all these other situations. Be okay writing code in front of people. And if there's one skill to hone, just work on that a little bit, because that is a skill that not even everybody in DevRel feels like they're comfortable doing. And that can set you apart. So
I think it's
I feel like that's the only skill I do have. The being able to write code badly in front of people. I created the typo script. It's perfect.
You're golden then.
I think it's worth mentioning when people are talking about sort of falling into it as well. For one kind of the reason why I ended up eventually getting a DevRel role is because, and this wraps up what everyone's been saying, is because I was doing it anyway, and I didn't even know at that point what this role was, and I didn't know it existed. But I was going to meetups all the time, and then I started actually then I ran a meetup. Then I did Cal mentioned it yesterday, I think, actually on Twitter, which is that whole thing where I arrived in Birmingham and PHP West Midlands had originally been set up by John O'Bacon, and then it sort of fallen on the wayside. And I said, right, well, if no one else is going to do it, then it looks like I'm the organizer, so I had to do it. So then I was getting on stage, and then I did my own personal blog. So by the time I was interviewing for like developer relations positions, I was doing it, but I was just doing it for free. So
And then you discovered somebody will pay you to do it, and life was good.
Now I get rewarded for it.
Suckers.
But now, I said that having a developer or being a developer and a good developer is a great plan B. But I'm now at a company where my sole job is to create training for developers. This to me is the natural offshoot of, I was working DevRel, I was talking to entire communities, but now I'm talking to a couple hundred developers, but I get to help them. And it's always been my goal. Back from my days when I was at Zend and at PHP Architect, my goal is to help bring up the next generation of developers. And being a DevRel person helped me do that because I got to create content, and now I'm getting to do it, and they're paying me to do it. And I'm hoping they're not watching because they'll discover they could probably get me to do it for free. So I love doing this.
We've talked about the positives. For those of you who did it in the past and those of you currently doing it, what is your least favorite thing about this role?
When meetings.
When the layoffs have to be made, guess who is first in the sites?
Yep.
I was going to say marketing,
niche,
but and we're expensive.
Nice to haves. We're classed as a nice to haves. That's what we are.
Yeah, and I think there's that at like an industry level. I think at a personal level, though, you have to get used to the schedule, like whatever your schedule is. If it's a lot of travel, okay. If it's content, if it's product launches, there's a lot of different things. But I think the thing that like kind of bugged me more as a software developer was that my skills dulled quite a bit. I was doing like Hello World 101, 201 level material. I wasn't getting into like the core of like any of the systems to understand how does this actually work. A few months ago, I was at Ingrok. I was like, yeah, it drives me up the wall. At Ingrok, I was like, okay, I'm going to become a Go developer. And it took a couple weeks, and I was a very mediocre Go developer. And I didn't have time to dedicate any more to it. Just because like there's just not the capability to do that, because you've got blog posts, right? You've got presentations, you've got emails, you've got all this other stuff that if you're not taking active steps to keep your skills sharp, they will dull, and they will dull quickly.
Yeah, I guess if you want to combat that as well, there's a lot of cognitive effort that's required. A really good example of this right now is that Steve and I are working on a live stream project where we are effectively rescuing a startup that had a Laravel app built for them. And I mean, it was a complete bin fire. So we actually couldn't save any of it, even though it was supposed to be going to production. So we are writing it in our free time or part of a little bit of work, sort of for free, but we're not doing it for free. We're doing it to keep the skills sharp, and then we have stories to tell out of it. But having to do that context switching all of the time, it's not for everyone, and it is really hard. So yes, free.
Yeah, I would say
pretty much free.
One of the things that would become frustrating was taking that feedback from developers and saying, "You're right. You're exactly right. I wish the API worked this way," and then not being able to do anything with it because I'm not writing the API. Best I could do is maybe try to make a client library better, right? Or not make it better and then give it to Jim eventually, so he can make it better. But there was that's a little frustrating too, and I think that echoes what Keith was saying about like, yeah, I'm writing code, but it's not amazing code. It's not necessary because it has to be accessible, right? Like it has to be something that a general developer can look at and say, oh, I get how that works. So I'm not really delving into everything new or complex things that might be interesting. So yeah, I'd have to second Keith's perspective there.
Wow, that's great. That was some great insight. All right. One of the things I really love about the PHP community is the global aspect of it, that we're a global community. And I know currently on this panel right now, we have probably a couple people who are struggling to stay awake because it's the very late night for them. We have a few people who it's the end of the day and they're looking forward to dinner at this point. And then a couple of us have still a few hours in the day. Before I let you all go and we wrap up, are there any parting words you all have for potential developer relations people out there, potential people when they run into DevRel people, what sort of questions they should be asking? Like, any advice for anybody in this world?
I say in
Jim?
all seriousness that, and I tell this to people who are coming to me also and asking if they should become a developer, and I've been saying this for years. If you don't love it, if you can't look at this life and say, man, I want to do that, don't do it, because you'll be gone in 6 months easy, and you'll be miserable for the time you're in it. And like Keith pointed out near the beginning, it's changing so much. If you're in it for the travel, you're going to be disappointed. These days, a lot of it is content creation and dealing with or engaging with people online. Okay, whatever that means at the moment. So, but if you love doing that, hey, I mean, I did DevRel for 10 years and had an absolute blast. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had.
Jim,
I think it's worth noting from within developer relations, because we are on PHP Roundtable, so this will sound like a very sort of familiar context that we can map into our own community. But there's been a tendency for people starting out in the field, as in people that have already landed their first roles, to get very wrapped up in the DevRel drama department, where it all kicks off online and someone's done something, and because there's not many of us, a lot of us know each other's business, which we sort of do, and questions came from sort of people. I've had questions from people starting out where they've said sort of, what are we supposed to do when people ask me about this and ask me about this in DevRel? And I say the same thing every time, is that I'm connected with the wider DevRel community, and there are a lot of PHP people within it that have now gone on to sort of be generic, kind of, like people like Lorna Mitchell and Davey Shafik, etc., who have sort of gone on to be part of generic DevRel. But really, if someone asks me at a booth and they say, what do you do? I don't really want to tell them that I do developer relations, because they don't care. They don't know what it is. My job is to connect with engineers. That is it. So if you get wrapped up in this sort of like, oh no, what am I supposed to do about DevRel this and DevRel that, and everyone's talking about it online and influencers are getting involved, don't bother. It's not worth the hassle. And, there's no controversy in PHP land ever. So no one has any frame of reference for that.
Well, no. And Keith is about as generic as we get. So.
Yeah. I'll actually second what Jim
never
said.
Offended anyone, I'm sure.
No, I've never offended anyone at all, ever. But I'll second what Jim said. When I was at Okta, the title I put on my badge and all my business cards and everything was API problem solver. And so people would ask what I did, and I'd say I solve problems with APIs. And some people would hear that and say, oh, I have an API, I have a problem, I can come to you. And other people would hear, I have a problem, you'll use an API to solve it. I was happy with either answer, but what it came down to is like, how do we solve these problems? And the problem could be done in terms of like technical, it could be docs, it could be a variety of different things. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, how do we solve problems? Code should be in our toolbox, but it can't be the only tool in our toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve, how about you? You got anything? Parting words?
If you like helping people and you're passionate about helping people, DevRel's perfect for you. I mean, it's why I got into it. I've been doing this for like 3-4 years before I even got my first DevRel job. I was my own YouTube channel, blogging, writing for people, speaking at user groups, running user groups, because I wanted to help people and I wanted to help grow a community that had given me so much. And then I spoke to Jim and he was like, you can get paid to do that, right? So now I do. So if you enjoy helping people and you're passionate about helping.
All right, Tim, how about you? Anything?
Oh, I mean, I'll break the cycle here of just talking about DevRel, and I'll take what you said about just people in general. I'll leave with this. these three things are important to me from a perspective shift. Everything is temporary. Nothing really belongs to you. And success is what you do, not what you have. And if you want the hour version of that, watch the keynote from PHP Tech.
Or go to PHP Tech.
Yeah, I actually want to add to that and then say DevRel's not the only way to help people and make a big impact, because there is such a thing as a 10x.
You could be a podcaster. Wait, I'm sorry, you were going somewhere else with that. Sorry.
Yeah. It's not the developer who does 10 times as much as anyone else. It's the one who goes and finds 10 developers that can teach something to.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean some binary of junior, senior. That means we all have something to learn from everyone. So be the mentor you want to see in the world. And that is the best developer relation you can have.
Cool. All right. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm one of the people behind PHP Architect, as well as a conference that's been referenced a couple times on the show today, Tech.
Client.
We brought. So the cool thing about this community is I was able to attend Tech for several years before I got to be one of the organizers of it. And it was so exciting to bring it back last year. We've already got 2024 up. If you would like to meet some of these developer relations people, past and present, this is probably a good spot to go. We do have call for papers open as well. If you are interested in being a speaker, they're running through the month. And if you got any questions about any of that,
when does the call for papers close?
End of this month. I think like the first week of November, because we're going to be at Longhorn as well. So, but yeah. So
come for the
DevRels. I'm one of the DevRels that can't do the States because I've got too many young children. So I'm literally restricted to Europe
right now. You're just not trying hard enough, Steve. This is why you're so young.
Maybe I'm trying to. Oceans are too big. Yeah, scary. They're just scary.
So my business partner in Discord, says November 30th is the official day. So try to get your talks in by the 30th of November. I was that's right. We're only in October. I said the end of this month. Yeah, end of next month. Right.
I'm extremely jealous and irritated of everyone that is going to Longhorn, because that's where I met Keith, and accidentally we did a reverse one where I insulted him by accident. But a Longhorn is brilliant. If you're not going to that, then go to that, and I expect I will probably see you at PHP Tech in April.
Yeah, I'll second the go to Longhorn. So
okay. Tim?
Oh, yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug my own Friday podcast, Dev Friday. It's the devfridayshow.com. And I was told by my co-host that if I was going to go on another podcast and you have a podcast, you must talk about your podcast on that. Also, because I think I bring up PHP Tech so much, it's a running gag on our podcast. So if you're interested in two developers just talking about whatever they want to talk about, in fact, today was kidney stones. A couple of weeks ago was gel blasters. It's but if you want to hear developers talk about random topics, go to devfridayshow.com.
So now you're gonna have to make me plug PHP Ugly, because otherwise the guys won't let me live it down. So
there you go.
There's podcasts out there to listen to.
Well, PHP Ugly is where you can hear Eric say that my podcast is terrible.
It's awful. I did say that yesterday, didn't I?
You did.
I might have slipped out. Okay, I say this to everybody who shows up on the panel, and I do sincerely mean it, that it's the people like you in the community that make the PHP community so wonderful and so strong, and has made me the developer I am today. That's for sure.
I'm not taking the rap for that. No,
it's all you, Cal. All you. But so it's great. I really do encourage anybody who runs into any of these people at a conference, at a user group meetup, to engage with them, talk to them. They're just the wealth of knowledge. This hour and a half, we couldn't even begin. It's a tip of an iceberg of what the stories that these people have. So thanks everybody for being a part of this edition of PHP Roundtable. See, I still have to pause every time I say PHP then I got to think, okay, where are my podcasts? Ugly Roundtable, yeah. PHP Roundtable. And until I can get another panel together, I will see you all later. Bye.